I knew something was wrong the moment I pulled into my driveway and saw a strange SUV sitting in my garage like it owned the place. It wasn't my sister's car, it wasn't my neighbor's, and it sure as hell wasn't mine. The worst part? The garage door was wide open, as if the universe was showing me the absurdity of the situation in broad daylight. I had been gone for barely 8 hours, and in that short time someone had claimed my property like a lion marking its territory. At first I thought maybe it was a mistake. Some delivery guy using my space to turn around, maybe a confused Uber driver. But when I stepped out of my car and got a better look, my gut told me this was something else entirely. The car was parked perfectly inside, as if the driver had taken their sweet time getting it just right. The door was locked, and to make things even weirder, there was a half-empty iced coffee on the hood. The condensation still fresh, meaning someone had been here recently. I marched up to my front door, checked to make sure nothing else had been tampered with, and went straight to the neighbors. That's when I met her. Karen. She appeared before I even knocked, stepping out of her house with the kind of confidence that only comes with a lifetime of getting away with nonsense. Short bobbed haircut, oversized sunglasses, and an expression that screamed, "I dare you to challenge me." "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my tone level. "Do you know whose car that is in my garage?" She didn't even hesitate. "Yeah, it's mine." Silence. I blinked. She sipped her drink. "I'm sorry, what?" "I parked there," she repeated, as if that somehow cleared everything up. "I needed the space." I laughed, waiting for her to tell me she was joking, but she just stared at me like I was the one being unreasonable. "So you just parked in my garage?" I asked, making sure I wasn't hallucinating. She scoffed. "It was empty. What's the big deal? You weren't even using it." Oh, this was going to be a problem. I took a deep breath, gripping the bridge of my nose to keep myself from losing it. "Karen, this is my property. You can't just park in my garage because you feel like it." She rolled her eyes. "Well, I was in a hurry, and your driveway was too sloped for my SUV. You have so much space, and I figured, since you weren't home, what's the harm?" The sheer audacity almost made me laugh. Almost. "The harm," I said, my patience thinning, "is that it's illegal. You're trespassing. Move your car." She crossed her arms. "I will, but I have errands to run, so I'll get to it later." "Later?" I repeated, now actually laughing in disbelief. "No, you'll move it now." Karen let out an exaggerated sigh like I was some unreasonable landlord asking for rent on time. "I can't. I'm going out with my friends. Just be a good neighbor and let it be." And with that she turned and walked back into her house, shutting the door in my face. I stood there, jaw clenched, trying to process what had just happened. I'd met my fair share of entitled people, but Karen was operating on a whole different level. I could have called the police. I could have had her towed. But something about her smug little smirk as she dismissed me ignited a much pettier fire inside me. Fine. She wanted to park in my garage so badly, she could stay in my garage. Without hesitation, I walked back to my house, grabbed the garage door remote, and manually locked it from the inside. Then I secured the side door with the deadbolt, checked everything twice, and made sure there was no way in or out, and then I packed my bags and left for a week. Now here's where things got really interesting. What I didn't know at the time was that Karen had gone into the garage before I locked it. She must have gone back to grab something from her car, assuming she could come and go as she pleased. But with the door locked and no way to open it from the inside without the remote, she was trapped. By the time I was halfway to my vacation destination, sipping a drink in the sun, Karen was stuck in my garage with nothing but her purse and the contents of her car to keep her company. Back home, the neighborhood was beginning to notice her absence. Her husband Matthew seemed vaguely concerned but mostly indifferent. I later found out he had assumed she went on a shopping trip or a girls' getaway. But Jennifer, her best friend and fellow drama queen, started raising questions. Meanwhile, inside the garage, Karen was discovering just how limited her options were. She had no phone signal, no food except for some stale protein bars I had forgotten about, and worst of all, no working restroom. She pounded on the walls, screamed for help, and even tried to pick the lock with a bobby pin. But the garage door remained stubbornly shut. By day 3, she was desperate. She tried everything, banging on the walls at night, honking the horn, even attempting to squeeze through the doggy door in a move so ridiculous I wish I had security footage of it. Meanwhile, I was blissfully unaware, enjoying my trip with zero interruptions, until I got a message from an unknown number. "Help me, you monster!" I stared at the screen, confused. Then another message popped up. "You locked me in, you psychopath. Let me out." And that's when I realized what had happened. Karen hadn't just parked in my garage, she had parked herself in my garage. And now she wanted out. But I wasn't in any rush to fix her problem. After all, she had told me to be a good neighbor and let her park there, hadn't she? I smirked, put my phone away, and ordered another drink. Karen could wait. By the second day, Karen had gone through every possible emotion: anger, denial, bargaining, and full-blown desperation. She had screamed, kicked the walls, honked the car horn so many times that the battery was nearly dead, and even banged on the garage door with a tire iron she found in the trunk. But nothing worked. The garage door was locked tight and no one had come to her rescue. It was starting to sink in that she might actually be stuck here for a while. At first, she had convinced herself that someone would hear her. After all, she was Karen, and Karen always got her way. Surely a neighbor would notice her absence. Maybe Matthew would realize something was off and come looking for her. But as the hours passed, reality set in. Matthew wasn't exactly the sharpest tool in the shed, and honestly, he was probably enjoying the silence. The neighbors? They didn't like her enough to be concerned. The only person who could fix this was Brian. And he was sipping margaritas somewhere far away, completely unaware, or worse, fully aware of her situation. She had to survive. The first challenge was food and water. A quick search through her purse revealed some breath mints, a crumpled granola bar wrapper that had nothing but crumbs, and a half-full bottle of overpriced alkaline water. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. She scoured the car next, rummaging through the glove compartment and center console like a raccoon digging through trash. Jackpot. A pack of stale crackers, a melted chocolate bar, and an old energy drink. It wasn't exactly a gourmet meal, but it was better than nothing. The bathroom situation was a different nightmare entirely. After holding it in as long as she could, she finally gave up and had to resort to an empty Starbucks cup in the back seat. It was humiliating, disgusting, and something she would never speak of again. She swore that the moment she got out of here, she would sue Brian into oblivion. She would make sure he regretted ever messing with her. It was unbelievable, absolutely surreal, and I couldn't wrap my head around how bold she had been. Seriously, she would never speak of it again. She swore that the moment she got out of here, she would sue Brian into oblivion. She would make sure he regretted ever messing with her. By the third day, she was starting to lose it. The walls of the garage felt like they were closing in. The air smelled like a mix of car exhaust and desperation. She had spent too much time arguing with herself, her thoughts spiraling in circles. She tried to sleep, but the car seats were uncomfortable, and the sound of absolute silence was unnerving. Every creak, every distant dog bark, every car passing by outside made her heart race. She would have given anything for her phone. But the signal was non-existent inside the garage, and her battery had already died. At one point, she got a brilliant idea. To escape through the doggy door on the side entrance. It was a small flap meant for a golden retriever, not a fully grown woman. But she was desperate enough to try. She got on her stomach, wiggled forward, and managed to squeeze her head through. The rest of her, however, was not cooperating. Her shoulders were too broad, her hips refused to budge, and she was now stuck, halfway in, halfway out, like a pathetic cartoon character. It took her 20 minutes of struggling, screaming, and pure humiliation before she finally managed to pull herself back inside. Her hair was a mess, her face was flushed, and her pride was in tatters. She was reaching her breaking point. Meanwhile, back in the real world, things were starting to get suspicious. Karen's best friend Jennifer had started asking around. Matthew, who had enjoyed a few blissful days of silence, was beginning to notice that his wife hadn't texted him in a while. He had initially assumed she was out shopping or relaxing at a spa, but when Jennifer called him for the 4th time, suggesting something might actually be wrong, even he had to admit it was getting a little weird. Matthew eventually wandered over to Brian's house, knocking on the door. When there was no answer, he peeked around the property, checking to see if Karen's car was still parked somewhere. The garage was locked tight, and without any obvious sign of his wife, Matthew shrugged and went home. If she was in trouble, he figured she would have found a way to let someone know. Back in the garage, Karen had reached the stage of insanity where she started talking to objects. The iced coffee cup from earlier had become Wilson, her only companion. She had full conversations with it, blaming Brian for her predicament, blaming Matthew for not realizing she was missing, and blaming the universe for allowing this to happen to someone as important as her. Wilson, of course, had no response, which only made her angrier. Then, in a moment of desperation, she remembered something. The garage had one tiny window near the ceiling. It wasn't big enough to climb through, but maybe, just maybe, she could get someone's attention. Stacking whatever she could find, she climbed onto the hood of her car, then onto the roof, and finally reached the window. She could see the street outside. Freedom was so close, yet so far. She screamed for help, waving her arms like a madwoman, but no one was around. The only person who did walk by was Mr. Michael, the elderly neighbor who always wore noise-canceling headphones during his daily walks. He didn't even glance in her direction. Her last hope was honking the car horn again, but after draining the battery earlier, that was no longer an option. She was stuck, defeated, trapped in a garage that until recently she had considered her personal parking space. And then, just when she had finally accepted her fate, she heard it. The faint vibration of a phone in the cup holder. Scrambling back down, she lunged for it, praying she had just enough battery left. The screen was dark. Dead. She cursed, shaking it, willing it to turn back on, but it was useless. She was still trapped, still helpless. Then, as if to add insult to injury, she heard the unmistakable sound of someone pulling into the driveway. Her heart leapt. Finally, someone had come to save her. But the second she saw who it was, her relief turned into pure, unfiltered rage. It was Brian. The garage door started to open, flooding the space with fresh air and sunlight, and as soon as it was halfway up, Karen exploded out like a bat out of hell. Wild-eyed, furious, and ready to unleash every ounce of pent-up frustration. Brian, however, just stood there sipping a drink, like he hadn't just left her to rot in his garage for an entire week. "Well," he said, smirking, "looks like someone had an eventful time." Karen saw red. She was going to destroy him. She had never felt this level of rage in her life. The second she stumbled out of the garage, disheveled, filthy, and shaking, she barely took a breath before launching into a full-blown screaming fit. "You absolute psychopath!" Karen screeched, her voice hoarse from days of shouting inside the enclosed space. "You locked me in there. You left me to rot. Do you have any idea what I've been through?" Brian raised an eyebrow, completely unfazed. I assumed you'd move your car when I told you to. Guess that didn't happen." Karen's hands balled into fists, her nails digging into her palms. She was dirty, exhausted, dehydrated, and beyond humiliated. The smell of stale energy drinks and sweat clung to her. Her once perfectly straightened bob now looked like a bird's nest. She had spent days plotting her revenge, fantasizing about every possible way to make Brian suffer for what he had done, and now that she was finally free, she was going to make sure he regretted it. "I'm calling the cops," she seethed, jabbing a trembling finger in his direction. "You're going to jail for this. This is unlawful imprisonment. I hope you have a good lawyer, because you're done." Brian took another slow sip of his drink. "Go ahead." Karen faltered for a second. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't even remotely worried. He just pulled his phone out of his pocket and unlocked it. "Want me to call for you?" he asked calmly. "Or do you want to use mine, since your battery is probably dead?" For a split second, Karen hesitated. Something was off. Why wasn't he afraid? Why wasn't he scrambling to explain himself? The way he was looking at her, calm and composed, made her stomach twist with unease. Before she could respond, Brian walked over to his car and popped open the trunk. He pulled out a small security camera in his hand and tapped the screen. "See, the funny thing is," he continued, completely ignoring the way Karen looked like she was about to explode, "I installed cameras around my property a while ago, and they've been recording this entire time." Karen's mouth went dry. He turned the screen toward her, letting the footage play. There she was, strutting up his driveway, waving her hand dismissively at him when he told her to move her car. There she was, arrogantly turning her back on him, saying she'd move it when she felt like it. And then, the cherry on top, there she was, sneaking into the garage for something from her car just before he locked it and left. Brian grinned. So technically you locked yourself in. I just didn't know you were still inside when I left. Karen's lips parted, searching for some kind of argument, but nothing came. He had proof, evidence. Her entire case crumbled in an instant. But please, Brian continued, slipping his phone back into his pocket. Call the cops. I'd love to show them this. I'm sure they'd be very interested in hearing how you trespassed on my property, parked in my garage without permission, refused to leave, and then accidentally got yourself stuck. I think the legal term for that is breaking and entering, but what do I know? I'm not a lawyer. Karen's face burned. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. She was supposed to be the victim here, the one calling the shots, making him grovel for forgiveness. But now, not only was her entire argument turned against her, she was dangerously close to being the one in legal trouble. She needed to regain control. You can't prove that I was in there for a whole week, she spat. For all anyone knows, I was only in there for a few hours. Brian smirked. You mean aside from the texts you sent me? Karen froze. Brian unlocked his phone again and scrolled through his messages before holding up the screen. Karen's frantic messages flashed in front of her, all of them screaming for help. Help me, you monster! You locked me in, you psychopath! Let me out! I've been here for days. I'm losing my mind. Brian raised his eyebrows. Doesn't exactly sound like someone who was in there for a few hours, does it? Karen clenched her teeth so hard her jaw ached. She could feel her control slipping through her fingers like sand, and she hated it. And then, to make matters worse, her husband Matthew finally decided to show up. He pulled into the driveway, stepping out of the car with a confused expression. Hey, babe, where have you been? Jennifer said she hasn't heard from you in days. Karen whipped around, barely holding herself together. Matthew, this lunatic locked me in his garage for a week. Matthew looked at Brian, then at the security camera in his hand, then back at Karen. Wait, so you were in his garage? Why? I parked there for a bit, and then he locked it. He did this to me. Matthew rubbed the back of his neck. So why did you park in his garage? Karen's mouth opened, then closed. That's not the point, Matthew. Brian gave Matthew a friendly nod. Your wife trespassed on my property, refused to move her car, and then got herself stuck in my garage when I left for a trip. I've got it all on camera, including the part where she texted me to let her out. Matthew exhaled slowly. Karen? Did you actually do that? Karen was ready to scream. This was humiliating. She had spent days suffering, expecting everyone to be on her side the second she got out, and now her own husband was questioning her. Brian clapped his hands together. All right. Well, I'm not going to press charges, but I will be installing a new security system to make sure this never happens again. Karen scoffed. Like I would ever park in your garage again, you lunatic. Brian grinned. Good. Then we're on the same page. Karen seethed, feeling utterly defeated. This wasn't over. She would find a way to get back at him. She had to. But then, as if the universe wanted to deliver one final blow, her phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced down at the screen. A fine, a hefty one, from the Homeowners Association. The message was clear. Unauthorized use of another resident's property, multiple complaints from neighbors, a decision from the HOA to revoke your community privileges for a whole year, no pool access, no clubhouse reservations, nothing. Brian gave her a little salute. See you around, Karen. Karen wanted to scream. She wanted to fight, but there was nothing left to do. With no other choice, she stomped back to Matthew's car, humiliated beyond belief. Matthew, meanwhile, just sighed. So? Should I even ask? Drive! Karen snapped, crossing her arms, and with that Matthew put the car in reverse and drove them away. Brian watched them go, then turned back to his garage, shaking his head in amusement. He had won. And the best part, Karen had done it to herself. Karen opened her mouth again, but all that came out was silence. The humiliation stung deeper than she expected, and the worst part? Everyone was watching. Absolutely no mercy. Never underestimate the power of calm revenge. When Brian returned home and found a stranger's SUV parked in his garage, he didn't scream. He didn't call the cops. He didn't start a fight. Instead, he shut the garage door and went on vacation. What happened next? Karen, the woman who trespassed on his property like it was hers, ended up trapped in the very place she claimed. No signal, no food. No restroom, just a stale iced coffee and her own ego. This isn't just a wild story, it's a reminder for all of us. Entitlement has consequences, and sometimes the best revenge doesn't require yelling or lawsuits. It just takes patience and security cameras. Too often in today's world we let little injustices slide, or we overreact and make things worse. But what if we did what Brian did? Let the entitled people write their own downfall, while we sip a drink in peace. Moral of the story? Document everything, lock your doors, and never let a Karen think she's in control. If you love real-life drama, petty justice, and HOA tales that will leave you cheering, follow and subscribe to HOA Revenge for more stories just like this. You won't want to miss what's coming next.